Welcome to Terrifying Tales, the channel dedicated to telling original horror stories. The last of the monsters. Cora Parabellum sat in silence. The soft fabric of the hotel room chair warmed her body as she sat in the darkness. Her eyes, ever watchful, fell on the sleeping form of Victor Argento and the steady rise and fall of his chest. The muffled sounds from the busy street below, car engines, excited voices, carried through the open window with the gentle breeze. Sounds Cora was familiar with, the only ones she'd ever known. Cora was a child of the modern day, unlike the man sleeping before her. She'd served Victor for 15 years, assisted him diligently every day. 15 years for Victor was a mere drop in the ocean. Cora came from a long bloodline, charged with assisting those like the man sleeping. She was the last of her family, as was Victor his. Victor was a man of few words when it came to the subject of himself, but Cora had extensive knowledge about Victor Argento, thanks to the meticulous journals passed down through her family. Victor earned the reputation of being the best hunter ever. There were almost 250 years of written history that attested to that fact. She was happy to see him sleeping for the first time in days. With the fights to come, perhaps the last to be recorded, he would need the rest. Victor stirred. A muffled cry, a thrush of the arm. Nothing to alarm Cora. She'd seen it many times when dreaming took hold of Victor. She knew the dream. It was always the same one. Romania, 1784. "This is suicide," Dmitri whispered as they sat hunched in the tree line overlooking the small village. The words weighed heavy on Victor. "She'll come through for us," he said. "My sister always does." Margaret Argento had entered the small village 2 days earlier. Her mission was simple, yet vitally important. Margaret had poisoned the well at the village centre, not with any substance that would cause harm to the inhabitants. A tasteless compound derived from the evening primrose. A compound that would give the waiting men a decisive advantage in the battle. The Parabellum's information had this village marked as the next logical target. The Temeritas clan were on the march, inflicting carnage and terror on unsuspecting villagers as they travelled through Romania. Victor understood the risks. The Temeritas clan was the last thriving family in the world. Ridding the world of evil was the task of the hunting families. The cost was steep. Victor and his sister Margaret were 2 of the remaining 7. The Temeritas clan's response for survival had been to amalgamate the surviving clans as one. Isabella Temeritas ruled over them all. The majority of the surviving clans were vampire, with one exception, the Lucci clan. Isabella needed the Luccis. They were a werewolf clan, led by Ben Lucci. Isabella had taken Ben as her husband to seal the alliance, much to the disgust of her brethren. The Luccis protected the clan during the daylight hours, taking away the best weapon available to the hunters, the sun. The creatures on their own were almost unbeatable under moonlight. With the low numbers of the hunters and the increased number of the clan, victory was impossible if the fight were a fair one. The plan was simple in theory. Poison from the evening primrose works on the clans much the way metal poisoning affects a human. The hunters would take away the speed and strength advantage enjoyed by the clans. It was the delivery system that left a bad taste in Victor's mouth. He'd protested, but found himself outvoted 1-6. Much innocent blood would need to be spilled for the plan to work. A blood-curdling scream carried from the village to Victor's ears. "Time to see if death is waiting for us all, friend," Dmitri said. The 6 shadows hurried toward the village as a single scream became a chorus. Victor pulled the black mask up from his throat to cover his nose and mouth as he sprinted forward. The black leather vest would do little to protect him, but he required the extra speed armour would take from him. The men fanned out as they entered the outskirts of the village. Chaos greeted Victor. Flames licked and swayed from the rooftops. Screaming faces covered in blood passed in every direction. Shadows bounded from rooftop to rooftop. The low growl caught Victor's attention. His boot slid to a stop in the dirt as he circled to face the darkened doorway. It was the eyes he found first, pale blue, shining like two stars in the night sky. Blood patted the dirt from its jaw as the hulking shadow emerged from the doorway. The werewolf dropped its head and arched its back. It locked eyes with Victor and let out a mighty roar. Time to find out if your task was a successful one, dear sister, Victor thought. His eyes closed. The beat of his heart slowed as it pounded his temple. His ears focused on the shifting dirt beneath the wolf's clawed feet as it rushed forward. Victor shifted his head to the side. He felt the flash of wind as the claw swung past his face. A smile formed beneath his mask. His sister's mission was successful. Victor unsheathed his sword. It sang in his hand. Dust licked his boot as the clawed arm thudded to the dirt. The wolf howled in pain as blood, black as the moonlight, sprayed from the stump. Victor let out a grunt as the next stroke cleaved the wolf, separating its head from its shoulders. The body crashed to the ground. A shriek rose from the rooftops as 3 vampires dropped to the dirt to surround Victor. The female vampire drew deeply and sniffed the air. "Argento," she hissed. Victor dipped the tip of the sword blade to the dirt and circled to eye all 3. A look of confusion covered their faces. A staggered step. They feel it, Victor knew, but they don't know why. The 3 vampires rushed from all directions as one. Victor raised his sword and cleaved through the shoulder of the first, splitting him in 2. He spun, hacked off the head of the second. Victor turned to the terrified eyes of the female and slammed his sword down into her skull. He wrenched the sword free and watched her turn and stagger away, more drunk than dying. Victor pushed his sword through her back and out through her chest, piercing her heart. She fumbled at the blade with a shriek of pain as she fell. "It appears we've won the day," Dimitri cried as he rushed to Victor's side. Screaming villagers continued their panic around them. "What of the others?" Victor asked. Dimitri shook his head. "Fallen." "Margaret?" Victor couldn't mask his panic. "I haven't seen her," Dimitri replied. The tree line above the village caught Victor's attention through the flames. 2 pairs of eyes were focused on him. Through the swirling smoke and ash, Isabella Temeritas had watched the scene play out. Not a hair out of place, the black strands fell neatly on the shoulders of her thick black coat. Ben Lucci, in human form, stood dutifully beside his wife. Margaret came staggering into view on the outskirts of the village, injured but alive. Victor's heart sank as Isabella's focus shifted from him to his sister. Victor sprinted towards her, Dimitri at his back. "Margaret!" he screamed. The powerful arm grabbed her from behind. Ben Lucci's smiling face appeared. "Argento fools," he spat. "Brave fools, but fools nonetheless." The snap from behind rang out through the night. Victor turned to see Isabella drop Dimitri's lifeless body to the dirt, his head facing the wrong way. "A valiant effort, Mr. Argento," Isabella said. The soft words swirled through Victor's mind, a sign that she was at full power and not affected by the poison. If I'd not been delayed, it may have worked. "Let her go," Victor demanded, his eyes darting between Isabella and Ben. Victor felt the hand around his throat as Isabella lifted him from the ground. Isabella moving faster than the human eye could detect. "And why would we let you go?" Isabella asked, her deep red eyes reflecting the flames of the surrounding fires. "I'm going to give you what you wanted, Mr. Argento. This war ends tonight, with your death." Victor's eyes found his sister's. Margaret gave a subtle nod. She lifted her leg and pulled the blade from her boot. Ben Lucci's body convulsed as he held Margaret. His flesh tore and stretched as he transformed. Margaret tossed the blade, coated in the pollen of the evening primrose, through the air. Victor caught it and plunged it into Isabella's chest to the hilt. Surprise filled Isabella as she staggered backward, dropping Victor to the dirt. Ben Lucci's claws ripped through Margaret's chest. Her body fell lifeless with a thud. With an almighty roar, Ben rushed to Isabella. He tore the dagger free of her chest and tossed it in the dirt. He threw her over his shoulder and raced toward the darkness of the forest. Victor crawled to Margaret and cradled her body in his arms, surrounded by flames. Victor woke with a start. It took him a moment to get his bearings. His eyes fell on Cora. "How long was I out?" he asked. Cora lifted herself from the chair. "A few hours." She opened the refrigerator and grabbed the ornate glass container. When Cora began her work with Victor, there'd been many containers. Her heart filled with sadness as she placed the almost empty container back on the refrigerator shelf. The last of the vampiric blood, harvested hundreds of years ago that night in Romania. The elixir that supplied Victor his ongoing life. Once empty, it would spell the end of a long and storied chapter of history. Victor accepted the glass from Cora. He studied the look on her face as he drank deeply. "What is it?" "Every time you drink it, a small part of me keeps expecting you to turn," Cora replied. Victor laughed. "You know it doesn't work like that. The blood doesn't carry the germ. The bite does." It was Cora's turn to laugh. "So you're just doing half the work for them. Now all those monsters have to do is bite you to make you a real vampire." She'd seen Victor slay all manner of evil, including vampires and werewolves. Victor's smile faded. "You have nothing to worry about." Cora noticed the change in tone. "I've seen you fight them. It's been closer to happening than you care to admit, Victor, so don't tell me I have nothing to worry about." "You've never seen a werewolf or a vampire, Cora," he replied. Cora's mouth fell open. "Horse shit!" she snapped without thinking. "How can you say that?" Victor couldn't contain his smile. Cora always tried to remain professional. He enjoyed her real personality. "You've seen the bastard creations by the true monsters. The kind made popular by modern stories in books, film and television. They lack the speed and strength of their makers. True monsters are born, not created." He met Cora's eyes. "You wouldn't be as impressed with me if you saw me take on a true vampire or werewolf. Even with my skill, I'm no match." "Temeritas and Lucci," Cora breathed. "How can you be sure they're still around?" "They're the last of their kind." Victor bowed his head in failure. "The only pair capable of creating what you've seen me destroy." "Don't you think it's strange?" Cora asked. Victor lifted his head. "You say you're no match for them, hunted them for over 200 years, yet not once have they attacked you. You've hunted the weaker versions, you say, that they've created. Not once have they retaliated. You are their only true remaining enemy, Victor. Why have they left you alone?" Victor had asked himself the same question many times over. "I can't be certain, but I do have a theory." "I'm all ears," Cora said. "You and I both know you're almost out of time." "The battle in Romania," Victor said. "I pierced Isabella's heart with the blade covered in evening primrose. The history is vague, but a wound such as that would weaken her for centuries. With only Ben Lucci remaining to protect her, I believe they have opted for a life of caution." Cora thought on Victor's words. "So how do we find them?" "We start as we always do," Victor said. "What have you found for me in the news?" Patience was a skill Ben Lucci gained after living for over 500 years. His eyes studied Victor Argento from the opposite rooftop. He lamented on the fact that he could end the life of the lone surviving hunter right now if he so chose. He would have acted on impulse without question in his youth. Is it really patience? He wondered. Ben was self-aware enough to know the answer. It was Isabella. They were the last of their bloodlines. Bloodlines that would end with them. The man on the other side of the window was responsible for that fact. If he were to force the issue now prematurely and Victor beat him, Isabella would be helpless in her weakened state. A smile creased Ben's lips. Two things were set to change. Isabella's strength was all but restored, and Ben had seen the girl opening the refrigerator. Victor was almost out of the precious liquid keeping him alive, keeping him strong. Isabella's instruction to wait, it seemed, was the right decision. For the past 2 centuries, Ben had kept a watchful eye over Victor Argento. Keep your enemies close. Ben kept Victor on his toes, creating plenty of impure creatures to test him. It was the only matter Ben and Isabella quarrelled over. Ben argued he was sticking to the instruction by not attacking the man himself. Isabella believed the attacks drew unwanted attention and would bring about their downfall. Ben refused to listen, and Isabella was too weak to intervene. Ben suspected that the attention had nothing to do with Isabella's anger. "She wants to kill him herself," he whispered. Ben stepped off the roof. The windows flashed past in a blur of lights as he plummeted. His boots hit the pavement in silence. My wife will be hungry. Let's just call it, Pete said. It's cold, late, and no one's out tonight anyway. The alley was dark, but Frank could see the others growing impatient, rubbing their hands together and circling in silence. We'll give it 10 minutes. His eyes fell on Susie, the youngest of them. The young one needs her first taste of how this works. Nobody comes through, I'll call it. The tension ease was instant. Frank watched them all relax, all except for Susie. You'll do fine, he said, resting a hand on her shoulder. One of the boys whistled. Frank turned his attention to the alley entrance and the shadow entering. Here we go. Just do like I showed you and you'll be fine. Frank gave Susie a gentle shove toward the figure. We're right behind you if you need us. Susie's footsteps echoed through the alley. Bile rose in her throat. She feared she couldn't go through with it. The fear prevented her from noticing the approaching figure's steps made no sound at all. Her fingers fumbled with the handle. The snap sounded as the blade shot out. Susie held it up. Give me your wallet, she stammered. Ben Lucci's laugh echoed through the alley. This isn't a joke. Give me your wallet. Susie found her confidence in the anger of being laughed at. Ben stifled his laughter. His face hardened. No. Stick him, Susie, a voice called from behind. Hurried footsteps echoed behind. Susie understood this was about to go badly. Just give it to me, she screamed. In their hurry, the boys failed to stop in time, knocking Susie forward. The blade slid through Ben's shirt into his stomach. They all waited for the man to fall. Ben's lips formed a smile, but his eyes told a different story. His icy stare sent a shiver up Susie's spine. Her brain told her to run, but she remained where she was. Her tiny fingers wrapped around the handle of the blade 4 inches deep in the man's stomach. A low growl emanated between Ben's gritted teeth. His eyes flashed bright blue. His fist knocked Susie backwards into the others. The force dropped them all to the ground. Ben convulsed as he stood over them. The gang stared on in stunned silence as Ben's body contorted with the sound of snapping bone. His flesh tore. Razor-sharp claws tore through the ends of his fingers and through the toes of his boots. Susie felt the warmth of her bladder void as the head of the werewolf towered over her. The wolf let out a deafening roar that bounced around the alley, causing Susie to cover her ears. The gang rose to their feet around her. Gunshots rang out. They did nothing. The werewolf stalked forward as if nothing happened. The screaming started. Claws slashed with the speed that Susie couldn't focus on. She felt the speed of each blow as the wind caught in the claws. Warm blood coated her face as it sprayed through the alley. Hands on her shoulders forced a scream. It's me! Frank screamed. Come on, get up! Susie's legs felt like jelly as Frank pulled her off the ground. Frank shoved her hard in the back to get her moving. Frank's shallow breathing followed her up the alley. She glanced back to see there was someone else with them too, but it was too dark to make out who. The alley grew silent behind them as they rushed across the gravel block. Get to the fence! Frank screamed. A roar carried behind them. They were being chased. Susie hit the fence first. She scrambled to climb. Her boots wouldn't grip. The hulking shape bounded from the alley toward them. Susie screamed in frustration. Come on! Frank's hand dropped down from above. Susie felt her weight lifted as the other person with them, Pete, she realised, lifted her up. Frank pulled her over the fence. Her boots landed with a thud in the soft grass. The smooth grey headstones of the graveyard surrounded her in perfect formation. Hurry up, Pete! Frank yelled from the top of the fence. Susie heard the scream from the other side. Frank dropped down beside her. Let's go! Susie followed Frank's lead as he crouched low and weaved through the rows of headstones. The irony of the setting escaped them both. They stopped to catch their breath. Susie peeked over the top of the headstones. The werewolf was stalking the rows. The wolf raised its head. Sniffing broke the dead silence. The pale blue eyes of the werewolf found Susie's terrified white eyes. Susie ran. Wait! Frank called. His scream followed. Tears blurred her eyes as she forced her feet to keep working. The wind left her as she fell face first to the ground. Susie backed up to the nearest headstone, her eyes darting in all directions. Growling coming from all around, circling her. The figures appeared all around her, faces she recognised. Her gang. Their eyes were pale yellow, jaws elongated, filled with razor-sharp teeth. Frank crouched in front of her, his face inches from hers. He bared his teeth and Susie closed her eyes. The roar was loud as the werewolf picked Frank up and ragdolled him away. As the werewolf let out a roar, the gang cowered in fear. The werewolf contorted and shrank back into human form. His suit hung loose in shreds around his body. "She's not for you," he yelled. Ben Lucci turned to Susie. "I'm sorry for frightening you, my dear. What is your name?" He held out his hand. "Susie," she stammered, taking his hand. The wind left her body as Ben pulled her upright with inhuman strength. He pulled the blade from his stomach and folded it back into the handle. "I believe this is yours, my dear." With gentle care he placed it in Susie's hand. "What do you want with me?" Susie managed to get out. Ben chuckled. "I would like you to meet my wife." Isabella studied the walls as she waited, seated in the ornate chair of the warehouse office. Her gaze lingered on the faces of her ancestors, one at a time on the oil portraits. Despite the humble lodgings, Ben did his best to bring a piece of home to keep her company. She remained grateful to him, knowing she would have perished long ago without him. Anger filled her with each portrait, reminders of what Victor Argento had taken from her. Her weakened state prevented her from doing anything about it, but she would have her revenge. Isabella's strength had almost returned. The office door burst open. Her husband walked in holding a struggling girl. A gang of freshly made soldiers flanked him. "Sorry to keep you waiting," Ben said, "but I brought you a gift." He tossed Susie across the room. She landed with a thud on Isabella's lap. Susie shook with fear as tears rolled down her cheeks. "Shh," Isabella whispered. "Don't fret, my dear." She gently stroked Susie's hair and pulled her into a sweet embrace. "It'll all be over soon." Isabella brushed Susie's hair away from her neck. Her head rocked back, revealing two perfect fangs, and she plunged them into Susie's neck. For the first time in over 2 centuries, Isabella stood while she fed. Susie's lifeless body hit the floor. "It's nice to see you feeling better," Ben said. A wide smile crossed Isabella's lips. Her eyes flashed red. "It's time." Ben returned his bride's smile. Isabella pierced her wrist with her fangs and knelt down beside Susie's body. "Are you sure you're strong enough?" Ben asked. Isabella gave a nod as the drops of blood fell to Susie's lips. "She can help the boys." Susie blinked. Her eyes flashed pale pink. "Come, child, you are needed." Isabella helped her from the floor. Ben turned to the gang. "I have a job for you, gentlemen." Ben and Isabella remained in the office once the others departed for the task at hand. "Do you think they're up to it?" Isabella asked. "Who cares?" Ben replied. "As long as they deliver my message, Argento will show." Isabella eyed the torn and shredded clothing hanging from Ben's body. "Change yourself into another suit." "Why?" Ben asked. "It'll just end up like this one when Mr. Argento arrives." Isabella let out a sigh. "Human women may abide their husbands dressing like slobs, but I refuse." Ben offered a curtsy. "As you wish, my love." The clash of steel filled the hotel room. Vincent stepped forward, laying strike after strike. Cora backed away, parrying each of them. "Good," Vincent said. "Now press." Cora charged forward. Vincent parried the strike and brought his blade to Cora's throat. "You're improving." "Doesn't feel like it," Cora replied, knocking Vincent's blade away. When none of the reports she provided had piqued Vincent's interest, they decided on training. Cora opened the refrigerator for a bottle of water. The door of the hotel room exploded off its hinges. Frank and the rest of his gang piled through the doorway, snapping and snarling. Cora and Vincent were cut off from one another. Frank's yellow eyes studied Vincent. "I've a message for you, old man," he snarled. "I suggest you deliver it while you still can, friend," Vincent replied. He held his blade ready to strike. One of the other wolves circled into the kitchen and pulled the glass bottle of blood from the open refrigerator. "No, you don't," Cora yelled, stepping toward him. The others grabbed her. She struggled to free herself, but they held firm. The wolf smashed the bottle containing the last of Vincent's vampire blood on the floor. Vincent strode forward. Frank grabbed hold of his sword hand. Vincent punched him to the face with his free one, sending him reeling across the kitchen floor. "Don't just stand there, idiots!" Frank growled. The others attacked en masse. Steel sang once more in the hotel room. The pack slashed and hacked the air. Vincent was always one step ahead, swatting the strikes away with his blade. Cora watched on in awe. Vincent drove his blade through the skull of the first. He ripped it free. The blade sailed around and cleaved the head off the second. Vincent ducked down as claws sailed over his head. He cut through the knees of the third and relieved that wolf of its head as it crashed to the floor. The two wolves holding Cora looked at one another. They let her go and leapt through the air towards Vincent. A slash so powerful Cora heard the blade kiss the wind. The bodies of the two wolves hit the floor, followed by their heads. Cora rushed to Vincent's side. "I believe you have a message for me," Vincent said. "Given there's only one alive capable of creating you, I ask, what does Ben Lucci want me to know?" Vincent took a step forward. "Wait!" Frank pleaded. "We didn't have a choice. Mr. Lucci wants you to go to him." "Where?" Vincent asked, continuing forward. Frank backpedaled on his hands and feet. "An old warehouse on 22nd Street. Vincent lifted the blade. "Please!" Frank lifted his claws in front of his face. Susie said from the doorway. Vincent turned to see Susie's arms wrapped around Cora. She had her fangs bared at Cora's neck. "You won't get far," Vincent said. "Maybe," Susie said. "But this one will be dead. If you come to the warehouse, maybe you can save her." Vincent studied Susie's eyes. "I see your maker's back on her feet." Frank crawled around Vincent to the door. "Come to the warehouse, Mr. Argento. The girl lives for now." Susie left the doorway carrying Cora. Frank hobbled after her. Vincent's eyes found the smashed bottle on the floor. "I have no choice," he whispered. "There is no tomorrow." He already found himself growing weaker after the energy spent in the hotel room skirmish. He entered the bedroom and pulled the old leather case from the cupboard. Vincent opened it, revealing his sister's dagger from all those years ago, and her silver locket. He slid the blade into his boot and placed the locket around his neck. A fool's errand, he knew. Evening primrose covered the knife in his boot and the sword in his hand, but he needed more of the plant. There was no chance. The primrose needed wasn't the common kind. It required the Antioch Dunes evening primrose, plentiful in the days of monsters and hunters, now an endangered plant, growing in one place only, far from here. Vincent held the locket around his neck. A gentle flick opened the latch. As if his sister was guiding him from the grave, a plan took shape in his mind. Isabella and Ben waited patiently in the darkness of the warehouse. Susie strode in, dragging Cora behind. She slid her across the floor to Isabella's feet. Frank hobbled in. "That guy's one mean motherfucker. Meaner than you even." Ben shot him a dirty look. "We will see soon enough." "What do we have here?" Isabella cooed, kneeling down beside Cora. "Have you brought me a snack?" "The girl was at the hotel with him," Susie said. Isabella studied the girl. Could it be? "Are you Vincent's parabellum?" Cora spat in her face. "You are a feisty one." Her eyes shifted to Ben. She could come in handy. Frank hobbled forward beside Susie, his face bruised. These two remind me of us when we were much younger, Ben." Ben looked Susie and Frank over. "As I recall, my dear, it was me who saved you from dying in Romania." He breathed in deeply, and before Isabella could respond, he spoke the words they were all waiting for. "He's here." Vincent knew there was no point in stealth. They expected him. There was no chance of catching them off guard. The front doors of the warehouse were wide open. His footsteps echoed throughout the building as his heavy boots hit the concrete floor. "It's been a long time, Vincent Argento," Isabella's voice echoed. She stepped from the shadows on the opposite side of the warehouse. Vincent unsheathed his sword. No distance was safe at the speed she could move. Vincent couldn't see them, but he knew there were other eyes on him as well. Susie and Frank watched with anticipation from the shadows. "Where's Cora?" Vincent asked. "Oh," Isabella responded. "Is that the little dove's name? She wouldn't tell me." "Where is she?" "Vincent, run!" Cora screamed. Ben Lucci had her wrapped in his arms. He dragged her out behind Vincent and blocked the exit. Let her go, Vincent said. What was it you said to him last time, dear? Ben said, smiling at Isabella. Vincent felt the hand around his throat as Isabella lifted him from the ground and knocked his sword from his hand. I believe it was, "Why would we let you go?" she cooed. Ah, yes, the memories, Ben chuckled. Vincent lifted the knife from his boot. Isabella caught his wrist with her free hand. Fool me once, she said. Isabella reared her head back and plunged her fangs into Vincent's neck. No! Cora screamed. Don't worry, you'll be next, Ben whispered in her ear. Isabella staggered backward and dropped Vincent to the floor. It can't be, she choked, coughing up blood. She crumpled to the floor. Vincent rose to a knee. He tossed the knife through the air. It sailed past Cora's ear and lodged in Ben's chest. Cora broke free and rushed to the side of the warehouse. Vincent picked up his sword and staggered over to Isabella. He held his sister's locket up. A parting gift from Margaret, he said. My sister kept a single bud of evening primrose inside. I swallowed it before I walked in. Isabella looked up in disbelief. I knew I needed the poison to beat you, and you were stupid enough to fall for it. Vincent lifted his sword and brought it down. Isabella's head rolled away as her body slumped to the floor. Ben Lucci roared as he ripped the knife free from his chest. He contorted as he rose and charged at Vincent in werewolf form. Light-headed from blood loss, Vincent's swing was clumsy. He missed. Ben's claws ripped into Vincent's chest as they both tumbled to the floor, sending the sword flying across the warehouse floor. It's time we left, Susie whispered, dragging Frank toward the door. Ben held Vincent down. He reared his head back with a roar. Cora's swing was true. The roar abruptly cut short. Ben's lifeless body tumbled away from Vincent. Cora eyed Vincent's wounds, pure vampire and pure werewolf. She hated what needed to be done. Tears swelled in her eyes. Did I ever tell you what happened to the bodies of the villagers in Romania? Vincent whispered. Cora shook her head. They never turned. Not one of them. It's the evening primrose. It prevents the change. Cora dropped the sword and knelt beside him. I have to get you out of here. You need help. Vincent shook his head. I'm tired, Cora. The mission has ended. This isn't my world anymore. It hasn't been for a very long time. No, you can make it. Vincent rested his hand on Cora's. It's okay. I'm ready. Cora stayed by his side until Vincent Argento drew his last breath. She picked up his sword and dagger and left the warehouse. The remaining evil in the world was now her responsibility. Sunlight bathed his face as Vincent found himself standing in a field. He was free from pain, free from anguish. The place was a beautiful dream. A soft hand gripped his shoulder. Vincent turned to find his sister's smiling face. Everyone he'd ever known was waiting for him in that field. A man hurried along the alley, eager to get home out of the cold. A firm hand stopped him in his tracks. The man stepped back as two dark figures stood in his way. He fumbled at his pocket. Here, take my wallet, he stammered. It's not your money we want, Susie whispered. If you like what you heard, please like and share the video. Please leave a comment and subscribe to the channel. And remember, the dark plays tricks with our minds, but sometimes it's not a trick. Sometimes there really is something there.